Oh, it's wonderful to be here. It's really wonderful to be here. As Vasika was saying, I actually spend quite a lot of my time travelling around to lots of different Buddhist centres and meeting people in their home situations. And it's so great to kind of look around a room and see all those people that I've met locally in one place. Yeah. So, I think there's something very kind of true to the myth of Adhisthana about that as well. You know, so people from all over the movement coming to Adhisthana and then kind of returning back to their situations. I just find that really beautiful. And I was reminded by seeing Daniel introducing the Dublin crew last night of an incident that took place when I was in Dublin earlier on this year. And so I was due to meet up with Casey. And we chose a location in the centre of Dublin, which is very prominent. So those of you who know the city will know that right in the middle of Dublin is this big, well, it's called the spire. Yeah, so it's this kind of big metal spike, basically, that kind of goes up into the sky. It's over 100 metres tall. So it's very easy, if you're unfamiliar with Dublin, to find the spire and just meet at the bottom of it. So I'd arrived slightly earlier than Casey, and I was just kind of taking in the city. I was just sort of looking around and trying to get a feel for the place. And over the road, I could see a group of rappers, a group of young men who were rapping, and they were attracting quite a crowd, actually, quite a crowd around them. And I listened to them. I listened more closely to them. And it sounded like they were rapping about global issues. And I don't remember exactly what they said, but I do remember the refrain of their rap. I think that's the right expression. So I'm not much of a rap connoisseur, but they seem to be pretty good. So if you'll humour me, I'll repeat this refrain. Let me tell you what the world needs, world needs. Let me tell you what the world needs, world needs. Let me tell you what the world needs, world needs. The world needs Jesus. I wasn't expecting that. It doesn't sound like you were expecting that either. So I suffice it to say, I don't agree with them. Yeah, you've come to the right gathering. It's okay. And I'm not going to critique their rap in depth. But I was very inspired by these young men, actually. So they were young men who were, as I say, just were standing up for their values in public. And the crowd that they were attracting was not just kind of well-wishing Christians. It was just other people who were interested, and it was even some people who were quite sort of hostile towards those values as well. So what we might say is that what the world needs is for us to stand up for our values. But actually, I'd like to take that a bit further, and then a bit further after that as well. So I think it's not just that the world needs us to stand up for our values, but the world needs us to embody and exemplify our values. Yeah. So it's like we need to kind of live from our values. But I take it even further than that and say that I think what the world needs is for us to exemplify not just any old values, but a life which is based on the best possible values, the highest possible values. I honestly believe, I think that what the world needs is for us to exemplify the best possible life. And for me, that life is characterised by what Bhante Sangharakshita calls the Bodhisattva ideal. So awakening for oneself and for all sentient beings. I don't think there's a better life than that, actually. I think if you really look at it, I don't think there's a better life than that. And I will say a little bit about exemplification before I kind of move on to the main body of the talk. I'm aware that when we talk about what the world needs now, it's it's quite a common motif for people to kind of, well, in a way, bemoan the woes of the world, which are many. And I feel like I've grown up. So I'm 31, and I feel like I've grown up throughout my life with just kind of one apocalyptic forecast after another, and the severity of these forecasts seems to get worse and worse as time goes on. And I don't know about you, but certainly for me, I just find that really dispiriting, actually. I find that as the severity of the world's problems kind of gets ratcheted up, and the explanations of those get ratcheted up, I just feel less and less able to do anything about them. Actually, it doesn't motivate me to act. Yeah. And just reflecting on my own life and where I have made big changes to my life, where that's come about has often been through other people. It's through seeing other people leading the kind of life that I want to lead. Yeah, that has motivated me. That has genuinely had that capacity to sort of move me into change, move me beyond change that I could see possible. And it was really nice hearing the Polish contingent, or some of the Polish contingent today, talking about that fact that we just can't foresee even the kind of changes that will take place. So I'm going to talk today about all about those values, the values which conduce to the leading of the best possible kind of life. And I'm going to try to talk about them in non-traditional terms. Yeah. And I'm going to look at this under 3 headings. So the first heading is looking up. Yeah, the world needs us to look up. And I'm going to illustrate this with some aspects of my own childhood. So you'll get a bit of a window into my childhood through this. Most of which kind of say what looking up doesn't look like, if that makes sense. The first aspect is that at school I was a very good boy. I think I got in trouble maybe once, something like that. And I was utterly petrified when I did get in trouble. I'm not going to tell you what it was about, but anyway. So I was a good boy, and that derived from I guess 2 things. So on the one hand, there was a desire to seek approval of my teachers, which I think is kind of natural, and even now I want to get people's approval. But also it was about a kind of fear of disapproval as well, a fear that if I acted out of line, I'd be punished. So that's not what I mean by looking up. It's not about a kind of authority projection or something like that going on. Actually, what I noticed as I grew up was that that kind of obedience became less and less cool. And in fact, kind of disrespecting one's teachers seemed to be the thing to do. But I wasn't like that, so I just kept my obedience quite quiet. So I kept my head down, Okay, so that's what looking up in the way I'm describing it doesn't look like. Also, at school, what's your reactions to this? I was always very good at tests and exams. Yeah, so I would often be one of the highest scoring people in the class, and that proved to be a bit of a social handicap as it happened. So more than once, someone would, a friend of mine would come up to me after having got a test score back, and they'd have thought they'd done really well on this test, and they came to me and said, well, "What did you get? What did you get?" And then I told them, and they were just a bit like, you could just see them kind of deflating through that experience. And it didn't help that I was smug with it. Just say I was. This is also not what I mean by looking up. It's not about a kind of scoring system or a kind of competition or comparison of inferiority and superiority. Yeah, that's not what I'm talking about either. And I think actually the whole thing about scoring systems can be problematic, not just from the point of view of this feeling inferior, but also because we can get very kind of tight around the scores that we get on things. You know, I noticed this as I was, particularly my degree result as well. I was very sort of tight around, and one of the dangers of that is that we can start to lose sight of those aspects of our lives which aren't sort of scoreable. We can. It's like our reality shrinks to what that latest number was that we got, and that sort of leaves out the richness of the whole of my life. So I might have been very good at physics, but I was actually quite obnoxious as well, and that was sort of left out of the package. Yeah. So an aspect of my childhood which much more exemplifies this dimension of looking up is as a lad watching my dad play the piano. So my dad's a very good pianist, and he still is a particular fan of J.S. Bach, Bach the Father, as he's sometimes known, and my dad would love the 48 Preludes and Fugues, and I just remember watching him as a child, and just seeing my father so absorbed in playing this fugue, playing this piece of music, the delight on his face as he's doing it, and this beautiful music kind of just flowing from his hands. And in that moment, what I realised is, I want to be like that. It was as though there was something in my dad playing the piano, which it sparked off something in me. Yeah, it was like the best in my father was sparking off the best in me, and that opened up a sense of possibility of what I could become through him playing the piano. So this is more like what I'm talking about in terms of looking up. So it's not like I was sitting there as a 5-year-old boy and kind of going, that's my dad, I should like his piano playing. It wasn't that I was kind of going, all right, that's a grade 8 piece, well done. That's a lot better than my Twinkle Twinkle Little Star or whatever I was doing at the time. It was just, there was this kind of spontaneous response of joy and a longing to be like that from seeing the best in him. So I think it's worth saying that it's looking up in the way I'm describing it is not straightforward for many of us. And I think there are possibly a number of reasons for that. So one of the reasons is to do with the so-called negativity bias. This thing that modern psychologists talk about, where apparently we're 5 times more likely to home in on criticism and negativity and fault-finding and disappointment and so on, as opposed to the positive, the good, the inspiring. And I think there's the other thing in relation to the two kinds of looking up that I'm not talking about. There's the fact that this looking up that I'm describing is very often confused with ideas of authority or a feeling of inferiority. Yeah. So it can be like we kind of throw out the positives of looking up because we don't buy into ideas of authority, or we don't want to feel bad about ourselves. But I think this is a great loss to us because, as I was describing with my dad, it's like when we see people who are embodying something which we want to become, that just, in a way, that kind of opens up our lives. It makes possibilities seem real to us in a way which maybe they hadn't before. And it's something which is intrinsically pleasurable. Yeah, there's something about seeing the good in others which just people love. in introductory courses in Oxford, we've tended to have an evening where we just part of the activity is rejoicing in the merits of others, and you can really just feel the atmosphere of this of the room lift as people dwell on and rejoice in the positive in others. It's really beautiful. And so the practice, it's worth saying it's difficult to do this. In some ways it's difficult to do this because, we need to get to know other people well in order to do it with meaning. We need to see people in all sorts of different circumstances. And we need to be perceptive and discerning ourselves in order to recognise the good in others. So it is a skill that we develop through the practice of rejoicing in merit. But yeah, it's a skill which is so worth doing. And as we do that, we also see that these positive qualities, they kind of constellate around some people more than others as well. You know, that we see that actually there are some people who are further along. You know, there are some people who are more developed than I am, and even more developed than other people I know. I just think that's wonderful. I think what that does is it suggests there is something in this Dharma life. There is something which I can, in myself, move towards. And yeah, it just opens up possibilities to me. And the final thing I'll say about this is I think it's one of the real blessings of my life that I found a community where there are so many people who I can look up to. One way I like to sometimes describe the order is as something like the highest density of people that I can look up to in any situation. It's not right. It needs a bit of kind of streamlining as a description, but it's something like that. You know, within the order, I find that just so many people that I can look up to, and it's just like, oh yeah, I want to be like these people. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to move on to my second set of points for those of you who are making notes. The American writer Duane Elgin, who I've recently come across, has apparently travelled around the world asking the same question. For about 20 years, he's travelled around the world asking the same question to lots of different audiences in lots of different situations. And the question is this. If you were to imagine the whole human race as a single individual, what stage of life would that individual be in? So would they be a small child? Would they be an adolescent? Would they be an adult? Or would they be a senior? Should we try this out? Yeah. Bit of audience participation. Does everyone understand the question? Okay, so imagine that the kind of behaviour and experience of the whole human race is condensed into a single person. And what stage of life would they be at? Would it be a child, an adolescent, or a teenager, an adult, or a senior? Okay, so raise your hand if you think the human race is like a child, a small child. Okay. Raise your hand if you think the human race is like a teenager. Okay. Raise your hand if you think the human race is like an adult. And what about a senior, someone in the latter stage of life? Great, thank you. It worked. Okay, so what Duane Elgin's found is that something like 2/3 of people think that the human race is like a teenager. Yeah, it's a sort of, the human race is like a teenager. And by that, what he understands is that the human race is kind of prone to in and out groups, you know, kind of polarizations around things. The human race has a very kind of short-term attitude to things. It's very impulsive. You may even say the human race is obsessed by sex as well, to some extent. takes me back anyway to my teenage years. So the conclusion that Duane Elgin draws from this is that we need to grow up. Yeah, that the human race needs to grow up. Indeed, the world needs us to grow up. And this is my second set of points. Yeah. So one of the things I can say about those people that I look up to, not just in the order, not just in our community, but more widely as well, is that to some extent, even to a large extent, they have grown up. And by that I mean they've cultivated an expansiveness of heart and a clarity of awareness as well. So they're aware of themselves, they're aware of others, they're aware of their environment, they're aware of the consequences that their actions have. And they're also able to take responsibility for those actions. They're able to take responsibility for themselves. And when I think about the people I know within the order to whom I look up, often that's also linked with, how do I describe it, a sort of assiduous performance of traditional religious practices. You know, so these very often what I encounter with people who really impress me, with impressive individuals, is that they've been practicing traditional forms for a long time. Perhaps decades even. And I think of people like Padmavajra, for example, who's been doing as far as I know, he's been doing the Padmasamava visualization practice every day for 40 years. And you can tell, actually, he's a really impressive man. And I think of Bhante Sangharakshita as well. So the first time that I met Bhante, it was within a year of first coming along, I wanted to meet him. I wanted to find out who the founder of this movement was. And I went with a whole list of questions, as you do when you go to see Bhante. And one of those questions was, so Bhante, how's your meditation practice going at the moment? I didn't realise quite how audacious a question I was to ask, but anyway, I thought I was interested. You know, how's your meditation practice going? And he was very kind, actually. He said, I don't tend to talk about my meditation practice at the time, but suffice it to say that it includes a lot of mindfulness and metta. And I thought, yeah, that rings true, doesn't it? You know, this man has been practicing mindfulness and metta for 70 years. And this is why he's like he is. So I think there's no, in a way, it's no coincidence. It's not accidental that the practice of these traditional forms results in a transformation. In fact, I think with some of the best practices that we have, there's almost a narrative of growing up which is built into them. So take something like ethics, the practice of ethics. There's a narrative of abandoning what is unskillful and cultivating what is skillful. You know, embracing what is skillful. That's a narrative. It's moving away from something and moving towards something else. And you take something like the metta bhavana. So starting off with our very natural self-interest, we learn to soften and expand that interest to include more and more people, more and more beings. And that's a narrative too, yeah. So it's like the practice kind of leads us through the process of growing up. And in fact, that's true of virtually every practice we do, one way or another. Whether it's friendship, study, ritual, living and working together, and many of the other sort of non-practices that we think of, that we might be able to think of, they have this kind of trajectory, this narrative of growing up, which supports our aspirations to do that. I'm also aware that even within myself and also with people I speak to, that there's a certain resistance or ambivalence to traditional forms as well. I noticed that in myself. I noticed that when Amalavajra was ringing bells for the mindfulness of breathing this morning. I was a bit like, do I really want to kind of do it in this way? And I wonder also, slightly cautiously I say this, I wonder whether there's a kind of postmodern view in there as well, about a kind of a wish to reject or even abandon forms. I don't know about that. I'd be interested to talk more with people who know about that than me. But what I often find in myself when I try to let go of a particular form is that I adopt another one, consciously or unconsciously, and often it's not such a good form. Yeah, so something like the Metta there's a reason why it's come down to us in the form that it has. What Prajnaketu cooks up on the cushion, it's slightly bleary on a Friday morning, doesn't have that same pedigree. So I think this thing about form is really important, and this what I'd like to challenge is the view that maturity consists in the abandoning of form, or that growing up consists in the abandoning of form. I think probably, ultimately speaking, that may be true, but proximately speaking, I think we need to not abandon forms, but bring a kind of karmic intelligence to them, or what I'd like to call a karmic intelligence. So by that I mean so you've got karma, you've got the law of karma, which can be expressed, well, I like to express it in this way, that those mental states that we act upon, or dwell upon or think about, become stronger. Yeah, so if I am experiencing an impulse of generosity and I act on it, I become a more generous person. Yeah, karma is karma, if you like, is the mechanism through which we modify our characters. And if we consciously decide which mental states we're going to act upon, and we choose to act on those which are in the line of generosity, of looking up, of kindness, truthfulness, and so on, those trends become more and more a part of who we are. So this is what I mean by karmic intelligence. It's applying this knowledge of the mechanism of karma to the practices that we do. So it's looking at a practice like the metta bhavana, like the mindfulness of breathing, like puja, and saying, well, what kind of mental states are being encouraged here, and how does the narrative of this practice support that? So it's not enough, in a way, what I'm saying is it's not enough just to do the practices. We kind of have to know why those practices work and how those practices work. I think there's something in here about the third lower fetter as well, if I may invoke the fetters list. The third lower fetter is sometimes described as something like the grasping at rules and observances as ends in themselves. It can also be described as a kind of just sort of going through the motions of a practice. But what I'm trying to say with this idea of karmic intelligence is that we can take ownership of those practices. We can see, what's the trajectory that this is leading me on, and we can participate in that. And over time, what we see is that we become an impressive individual. Yeah, I mean, I see this. I'm just sort of looking over. I see this even in my contemporaries in the order. We have some really impressive individuals already. So that's kind of the process of growing up, as I understand it. It's not a biological thing. It is a biological thing in the sense that we kind of naturally grow up. We don't have to kind of look after that. But this growing up that I'm talking about, that is about taking responsibility for ourselves and about emotional positivity and awareness. Actually, that is something we can take responsibility for. And the result of that is, we start to become, better people, ultimately, better people. Okay, so I'm beginning to move on to my third and final set of points. The aim of the Dharma life isn't just to become an impressive individual, though. And I think this is worth stating. It's not just about becoming a better person. it's not even about necessarily having a positive impact on the world as an end in itself. Might be a bit controversial here. I call this talk the return of the Bodhisattva. And the Bodhisattva is more than an impressive person. It is more than someone who just has a positive impact on the world. And I say this partly because moving around in certain circles, one might be forgiven for thinking that Bodhisattva activity consists in doing one's recycling, or shopping locally, or being interested in left-wing politics, if I'm honest. Now, all those things are good. I do the recycling. I try to shop locally. I am interested in left-wing politics. I'm also becoming increasingly interested in what might be called right-wing politics as well, but I won't go into that. But the Bodhisattva is more than this. The Bodhisattva ideal, importantly, is more than this. And I think the life of Dr. Ambedkar, or certain aspects of the life of Dr. Ambedkar, really beautifully illustrate this. So Dr. Ambedkar was just an outstanding social and political activist. What he managed to achieve as a politician and as a social activist against kind of unimaginable, or what to me anyway is unimaginable obstacles, I think is just incredible. But even he saw that social and political activism can only go so far. He saw that in order to effect the total uplift of his people, of the untouchables or the ex-untouchables, what was needed was Bodhi. What was needed was waking up. Yeah. So if you like, the slogan I've been thinking about in relation to this is putting the Bodhi back into Bodhisattva. Yeah, so it's a bit cheesy, but anyway, putting the Bodhi back into Bodhisattva. I think as Buddhists, it's really important for us to emphasise the Bodhi. Yeah, in a way, that's our kind of value-added factor that we bring to the discussion of what the world needs. So by Bodhi and waking up, I mean kind of two things, or you could say two axes. So the first axis I would call dharmic depth, and the second one I'd call cosmic breadth. And we need both, basically. We need to have both axes, both dimensions present in order for us to, effect the Bodhisattva ideal, bring the Bodhisattva ideal into reality. So by dharmic depth, what I mean is seeing very clearly the extent to which dukkha, our suffering, arises out of a clinging, so clinging to pleasant, painful, neutral experiences, past and future, present experiences, but how it also arises out of views. And those views might be very subtle perspectives that we hold, or they might be very gross ideologies that we kind of rally around. So waking up is seeing that our dukkha arises out of clinging and views, and it's seeing that insofar as we're able to relax that clinging, and insofar as we're able to inhabit perspectives which question the permanence, the satisfactoriness, and the substantiality of our experience, to that extent we become liberated. To that extent we liberate ourselves. To that extent we see that actually our experience is incredibly mysterious and ultimately transformable, like utterly transformable. And this is a really profound point. What the Buddha's saying in effect is that the complete cessation is possible. The complete cessation of suffering is possible because experience is wholly transformable. Yeah. So that's an aspect of the aspect of dharmic depth. There's also the aspect of what I call cosmic breadth. which is recognising that it's not just about me and my dukkha, much as I get so caught up in that. It's seeing that just as my experience is transformable, so in fact are all phenomena. So is the entirety of, if you like, the cosmic experience. It's transformable and it can be supported in moving towards awakening. I can't think of a better way of describing this than the concluding part of the transference of merit and self-surrender section. So may I become that which maintains all beings, situated throughout space, so long as all have not attained to peace. So this is a really cosmic vision. It's not about me. It's not even about my loved ones or the social group that I associate with. It's saying the life that the life of the Bodhisattva, the Bodhisattva ideal, is about all beings whatsoever. So it's both deep and it's also broad. This life, and we need both. We need to bring both to bear in the way we articulate Buddhism. But I think it's also worth saying that these are very lofty ideals. Yeah, really lofty, probably the loftiest ideals. And whilst it may be that to some extent we've had a taste of dharmic depth and cosmic breadth, probably for most of us, myself included, that's not that's not where I'm acting from. That's not where I'm talking from all the time, and not by a long way. But even if that's the case, we can still use those. We can still use those features of dharmic depth and cosmic breadth as reminders. Reminders not to kind of get stuck on particular level of action or discourse. Whether it's social, political, environmental, whether it's psychological. And what I mean by getting stuck on that level is basically just getting really caught up in views and arguing about views. Yeah. It seems to me like quite a lot of energy is put into just arguing about views, holding on to our stories and just, against one another. That energy could really be liberated if we're able to take this bigger perspective that, the complete overcoming of suffering is possible and it's possible for all beings. Does cast a certain perspective on, the sort of small-minded arguments that we can get into, or even a kind of superficial approach to action that sometimes we can get into. But to the extent that we're able to touch this more and more, and this does happen, I think, and I see this in people that I look up to the extent we're able to touch these dimensions more and more, what we find is that our actions become kind of invested with a potency, a really supernormal potency, a potency which to others may even seem kind of magical or miraculous. I'm thinking in particular here around the Dhamma revolution in India, for example. I think whilst there's still a lot to do in India, what they've achieved over the last 60 years since the mass conversions in 1956 is incredible. It is almost, if not miraculous. I think the same is true of our own movement as well. We have a penniless English monk returning to England, rather bookish kind of guy, and 50 years later, here we are. And not just here, but across the world as well. There is that kind of character of magic or even miracle to those actions and communities and activities which have that quality of depth and breadth to them in the way I've been describing them, that are kind of redolent of waking up. So I've talked a fair bit about looking up, growing up, and waking up as and the need for us to exemplify those principles, those values. And I think the scope for creativity in this is incredible. I think we've hardly scratched the surface in how we can exemplify these values and exemplify the life of the Bodhisattva. So I just encourage you to try to bring these as much as possible into whatever circumstances you find yourselves. So whether it's at work, whether it's at home with your family and friends, whether it's at the Sangha, your local Sangha, or even in the creation of a Sangha, whether it's online, see if you can bring those qualities of looking up, growing up and waking up into your online activity. It really needs it. So what I see and what I've seen in my own life is that to the extent that others are looking up, growing up and waking up, that sparks off something in me. And I think that probably we're all here because someone has sparked that best in them, if you like. Someone has sparked that off in them at some point. And as we exemplify more and more, as we bring those qualities into our actions in all the domains that we live and work in, receptive people will start also to be sparked off. There are lots of receptive people out there, and the best in them will be sparked off by the best in us. And the best in others will be sparked off by the best in them as well. And then, as time goes on, we will come to see the return of the Bodhisattva. Thank you.